Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. My name is Chris Spangle. Thanks so much for joining us today. And I have a guest. His name is Dan Miller, a local historian. I'd say national historian, but you work here in Indianapolis, and we become good friends over the years. Thanks for being here.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. Local, national, subterranean, whatever word works is fine by me.
You've been a guest on the podcast before, and a confluence of events took place in a single week. I booked a trip to Mount Vernon at the end of the month. I signed up for your event through the Remnant Trust,
okay,
and then you reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'd like to be on the show." I was like, "Well, to talk about George Washington." I was like, "Well, this is just this is Providence, as our ancient friends might say."
That's true.
So why don't you give us a refresher on Dan Miller? What do you do? And Historical Solutions, American Redo, and your event at the Remnant Trust. Kind of give us your background.
Well, thanks again for having me, Chris. I appreciate it. So a little bit about me, historicalsolutions.com, by the way, is the website if you want to check it out. But I've been in business since 2004.
Wow, congrats. Over 20 years now.
Yeah,
wow.
Over a quarter century plus one, right? So I use the past to help people become better leaders.
Yeah, which I think is such a brilliant... You were in C-suite jobs, you were in corporate America, and then you loved history and transitioned into coaching people using history. I've never heard of anybody doing that before. I think it's so smart.
Well, you're nice to say that. I've done it. I've done it ever since then, which I guess is a measure that it works.
Yeah.
At least for some people, to keep me going on for 24 or whatever the number is at this point. And honestly, one of my biggest things that I've been doing since 2022 is the anticipation of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration. I started writing about 1772, which was 250 years ago that summer.
Yeah.
And I've been writing about 250 years ago ever since. So once a week, Americanism Redux or Redo, R-E-D-U-X. You pick your pronunciation.
Okay, yeah, so I went French.
That's all right.
You went Versailles, Indiana, and I went Versailles.
That's exactly true. So check that out. It's on the website. It's a lot of fun, and I got to tell you, it's real people, real stories, real life, and it gives you a different perspective on the founding. And we don't need to get into this today, but I need to think through this because there's a methodology in it that I just now have kind of come to realize, which is time at a time. And that's how we live our life. We're doing this on a Monday. We're coming off a weekend, right?
Right.
And it's time at a time. And, you and I think we know what the rest of the day looks like. You and I think we know what the rest of the week will look like.
Right.
But in truth, we're guessing. Educated guessing, maybe, but it's still a guess. That's how you're experiencing the founding when you do it a week at a time.
Yeah.
Now, there's people at that point that are claiming all kinds of prescience, and God bless them. But the truth is they don't know. That's aspirational, and it's a week at a time. And I tell you, it reveals some really important realities that are so ignored or misunderstood or just never understood that I think are critical and I think change the landscape a lot. So more to be said. I won't drag it on here, but
I might drag it on. So essentially what we're going to talk about today is 4 moments in George Washington's life that he said goodbye and exemplified leadership. So that's why I invited you here today. We'll talk about that. But I feel, look, my last name's Spangle. I'm as patriotic as the next guy. I've not been, if your definition of patriotism is loving your country, but disliking your government, I've been very patriotic for 25 years.
Right.
I'm excited about the 250th, and I've taken the opportunity, starting with Ken Burns in November and just leaning into founders but just with this central question, as I'm reading, thinking, watching, what does it mean to love your country? Because there are so many hypocritical pieces of American history, of American society. I have friends on all sides of the spectrum who make good points, right? Like I'm not as ideological as I used to be. I want to love my country. I want to learn about our history. I want to feel good about America. But I also don't want to be a socialist and throw all of that out or be a Christian nationalist and say this, you have to believe this or else, right? Like, I think it's a very confusing time for people who are a little patriotically homeless. What would you say to somebody like me who is wanting to lean into this, but you don't know where to start, you don't know how to think about it? You do it every day. Why don't you give us some advice?
Well, wow. I'd say probably three things. Number one would be trust your instinct. Number two would be use your knowledge. Number three, in whatever form it takes, would be follow your soul.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you keep those three threads in your hands, then that's the way to go. That's a great way to proceed.
Yeah.
I agree with and to some extent live with in my own life much of what you just said about yourself in terms of patriotism, all in, and other isms less so. But I will tell you another thing, which is that, the past is everything. The past is total, which means that the past is perfect. History, in my view, is just a set of slices of the past that for some reason have been remembered. Now, sometimes it's accurately, inaccurately, and on and on and on. But history is partial in the sense that it's a part. The past is impartial in that it is everything. So we have to be very careful about understanding the distinction between the past and history.
Yeah, history is something that's provable. So I'm more in the loss of the Library of Alexandria all the time. Mm-hmm. All these great libraries that got destroyed in world wars and by Mongols and all these different, those were texts, right? So that's proof that we no longer have, right? There's information about the past that we can't prove, and so therefore it's sort of that's history is what you can prove, right?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Maybe it's provable, but it will be presentable in some form. It can be presentable in the context of a manuscript about somebody's life. It can be presentable in the context of a court case that's been recorded, either orally or in writing. It can be presentable by somebody's will that they write and leave. So, but I personally strongly hesitate to use the word provable. It's just presentable, and in that it's here, it exists. Now, It may not exist anymore, which is what you're saying regarding the libraries and historical society and so on. But it's present, and whatever's present is in fact part of the past and is in fact history. But it is only a microcosm, a fraction of what totally existed. And now I'll use me and I'll use you as an example.
Sure.
You and I would each say that we are our respective experts on our past.
Sure.
But the truth is that what you or me can recount from last week is a fraction of what actually occurred to us last week. And so, and what we may recount from it could be wrong.
Yeah.
And not through anybody's,
and totally different perspective than maybe somebody else who lived through that with you,
who walked down the street at the same time you did at a particular moment. So, I think we need to take that realization, and that feels very real to me, and just magnify it. Then the further up you go in terms of the scale of the history that's being discussed, the further that's true. So, I remember several years ago I read an account of Pickett's charge. In third day Gettysburg, all of that. You'd think if anything could be quantifiable, that would be. But when you start to stack up the accounts of it, there's all kinds of disagreements about the numbers and the positions and And so just take that for every single instance.
I'm reading Pauline Mayer's American Scripture about the Declaration, and
great book.
I'm towards the end where she's talking about Jefferson and Adams rebonding essentially over their memories of that American Revolutionary period, and and they're kind of forgotten in their own time in a lot of ways. And so other people were filling the void and talking about what they did to promote themselves. And, I forget which founding father was saying, well, I was the one who argued most fervently for American independence. And Jefferson was like, do you remember that? And Adams was like, no, that's not true. Right. And maybe in that guy's mind, he was telling the truth. He was the, sit down, John version of his state or whatever. But yeah, I think that's the hard part about discerning truth. I mean, you take something like, was America a Christian nation when it was founded? Mm-hmm. Was the intention of the founders to make this a Christian nation? Well, it depends on who you ask, because it wasn't.
What day you ask.
Right. But Jefferson writing a lot about Muslims and wasn't intending to put the creator into the Declaration. But John Adams had a totally different view.
It's exactly
true.
Who
had a different view than the secular Ben Franklin.
And this takes us back into the redo redux thing, which is ask that. That's a great question. Are we Christian from the founding, at the founding, in the founding? And if you were to, I'm not joking when I say it depends on who you ask and what day you ask them. Also, it depends on where they are. If you walk into a church on a Sunday in mid-July of 1776, and you ask the people in that church, there's a very clear answer. Right. And by the way, it may be no, because it's an Anglican church. Right. The other thing is, if you go down the street and walk into a tavern, there's going to be a different answer there. And the answer will change as to who's in the tavern.
Sure.
So I think it's much more
If you sit down with our Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith, he argues this point.
Absolutely.
As he and I have done at lunch, he argues it effectively, as would David Barton, the historian. But Gregory Boyd, an author, argues it effectively the other way. And so when you have so many different variables and threads and perspectives, as you're doing your work, how do you discern what's truth?
That's a big one. I'm trying to look. I'm always interested in what is the truth, but I'm really looking to share what is accurate. And I'll let other people smarter than me come to their conclusions about the truth of something. I just want to give them what's accurate for them to do that. So everything I try to do in my Redux is I'm striving for accuracy in what I'm sharing. By the way, in story form, these are just vignettes and stories that are about each week. And then I'll let others grapple with the truth. One thing I'm very uncomfortable with is finality. And many people tend to talk about things in tones of finality. And I'm not going to be the person probably to do that, unless it's to point to my own shortcomings and to everybody else's. There's a finality to that. But I would urge everybody to always keep front of mind one of the things that Lincoln was so gifted with, or at, and blessed with, which was his humility, which to me is an anti-finality position. I could be wrong. I believe this. I'm talking to you about this, but I could be wrong.
Right.
Now, there are things he'll get to where he says, I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I sort of feel like that. There's always a pendulum in American history, and maybe the next pendulum to swing back is, I could be wrong.
Right.
Away from, this is how it is.
Right.
Which is a moment of where we're at.
And I understand there's a big group of people, and I'd count myself among them, who would say that it's really dangerous to say that everything's wrong and there is no right.
Yeah.
And it gets to your question about the truth of things, and there is no truth. I mean, that's a relic of the 1960s, largely out of French philosophy at that time. And I'm down to my toenails opposed to that. So, but in terms of my role as the voice of Americanism Redux, my mission is to be accurate. And then you go from there as the reader, because you can count that I've done my very best to be accurate. Now, is that a guarantee that I, as eternal as the sun? Probably. I know it's not, but I've certainly made it my core mission is to be accurate in doing that. Now, if you don't mind, I'll share with you just a second here about my latest entry from last week.
Please.
July 9th, 1776. I wrote about the Declaration, but not about the way, or not in the way that everybody probably had heard 5 days before. I wrote about the effect in the next day, 2 days, 5 days, 6 days after the the printing and the publication of the document that had no signatures aside from 2.
Yeah, and then they took that and sent it out to every sheriff, major congregation across the 13 colonies
It's exactly
to disperse
right.
that information.
It's exactly right. And it's really something to see what a kid does with it, who's 11 years old, named Ray. It's really something to see what a pair of college seniors do with it on the campus of what's now Princeton. When they're hearing it, it's really something to see what a 22-year-old carpenter who's enrolled or enlisted in the Continental Army as a carpenter, what he sees done with it on the bowling green in New York City. So some people see it as this is the opportunity for us to throw a rope around an iron statue and pull it down and smash it into a million pieces. That's Bowling Green.
Yeah.
Other people see it as a reason for a group to run upstairs in the Pennsylvania State House, pull off the wall, the King's coat of arms, run it down and throw it into a massive fire that's burning outside. I got a couple. I got a soon-to-be husband and wife in Connecticut who make their wedding around it to a great degree, an all-American wedding, an all-spangled wedding.
Yeah. Right.
And they make their own alcohol, they make their own clothes, they make their own chairs, and it's an all-American wedding.
Right.
And the point being, they're expressing that support of it. So we can go on and on, but I mean, I was interested.
That's the Declaration is the moral imagination. It's not law. It's still not law, but it is the moral imagination of America that's used in the Black Panthers in 1968 put the preamble to the Declaration into their platform. Women, Elizabeth Cady
Tiananmen
Stanton,
Square, 1989.
Frederick Douglass is the first person to argue, not the first person, but I mean, look, equality was maybe not the force of the document at its founding. It was more about self-governance, but equality certainly becomes one of the promises that are enumerated, and a lot of that is articulated in the generations after.
It's exactly true. And
this is our promise, Martin Luther King. This is your promise to us.
I would argue that, the Declaration breaks down into 3 sections. One is the opening, which is philosophical primarily, rhetorical, if you will, too. Yeah. Second is the kind of the case presented in any solid courtroom, which is the list of grievances. Yeah. And then the third, 250 years ago, is, as of right now when you and I are here, the third hasn't even been done yet, which is the signatures. And I would argue that it's the signatures that's the most important part of the 3-part document. One thing I've written about and I've talked about, including at the Remnant Trust, is the Declaration is a catch-up document. It is not a groundbreaking document in the way that we tend to use that term, as in new.
Yeah.
It's groundbreaking. Okay, I can absolutely go with that, especially with the signatures attached. But it's not new. It's catch-up, because if you don't have Thomas Paine in January, you don't have the Declaration in July.
Certainly.
And so they're struggling. Jefferson is struggling to catch up with the blast pattern that's been created by Paine's common sense that was issued in the middle of July or the middle of January.
And if you're not familiar with common sense, essentially Thomas Paine, the colonies are talking about independence in a very legal way. It's the kind of elites talking about elite things. And Thomas Paine, this Englishman from a rebellious English town who has lived under the crown, he comes to America and puts it in language that the average person understands. He's the memes versus your mainstream media conversations around this stuff, if you want to put it in modern parlance. And he's the one who takes it from, Parliament's a bunch of baddies, but we like the king. We're trying to make peace with the king. And he's like, no, the king is an evil human being, and we need to fight for our independence. And he's pure democracy.
You're right. He's also, by the way, it's 46 pages, which is pretty compact. And as you said, the imagery is very different than most everybody else's who are writing essays and booklets and all the rest. But he also introduces a word that everybody's flirted with, or not everybody, many people have flirted with, but nobody's put onto the wall and then unfolded. And the word is actually prior to independence, and the word is separation. He creates separation as the first step to independence. What most people don't remember, two things they don't remember about the 46 pages is the first part of it. Reads like a church sermon out of the Old Testament. It's amazing how this future atheist is so steeped in Old Testament imagery. So that's the first thing you got to wade through. Got to put that literally. You wade through a lot of these references to the first half of the Bible. The other thing that people don't necessarily remember is that in the end of the thing, he presents a plan of government. Now, it's kind of ridiculous. It looks that way from us, but to them, it's not that way at all. This is brand new. So he's actually anticipating what should happen next. We have to separate first. We're independent second. And then third, we have new governments. And he's offering an example of what he sees as a new government. And it's so important because Thomas Jefferson had written an essay. He was ready to publish an essay. This is late 75. Ready to publish an essay, man. And he was all set. He had his topic, and the topic was going to be King George had just given a speech that Jefferson had landed in Jefferson's lap, which meant 2 or 3 months prior. And the speech had a reference by the king to the years the years associated with the official British effort to colonize the New World and the support that had been given by the British government, specifically in Virginia and a lot of places. And Jefferson just went nuts, said, oh, this is all wrong. These dates are wrong. The facts are wrong. And so he had this essay in mind, and he wrote it to counter his kind of historical courtroomy type of component of the king's argument. Well, when Jefferson reads his first reading of the Common Sense, he puts that essay that he was so proud of in a drawer. Well, this is useless because I'm arguing about something that has now just been withered and flattened by this other guy who I have no idea.
Yeah.
Who I have no idea is. And so at any rate, he's catching up to that when he sits down in that room in Philadelphia as part of the 5-man committee to write the first few drafts of it.
Yeah. And they're pulling from the English, the English thought of the English declarations against the king, the Magna Carta. Like some of the language that Jefferson and the other drafters used wasn't.
It's not.
It's not like he invented this out of whole cloth either. It's hey, this is the English tradition of self-governance, taxation. We're going to govern ourselves. You have no right to govern us. This is purely English. This is a part of our heritage.
And there's a lot of mixing and matching.
Changing the terms.
That's exactly true. There's a lot of mixing and matching that's going on. And one of the classic things is his insertion of the pursuit of happiness instead of property, life, liberty, and property, which is Locke's original troika. But Jefferson plops in, I think it's James Harrington, if I remember correctly, the pursuit of happiness phrase and idea instead of property as part of that. So there's a lot of mixing and matching that's going on, but it's all catch up because they're trying to find the best stew on the stove that will satisfy people who are now hungry for separation because of having read Thomas Paine
and trying to get the delegates to vote for it. Exactly part of it is Jefferson's first draft is largely different than a lot different. Like the deletions of slavery, than what actually gets passed because they're trying to go for unanimity. I can't say the word. They're trying to get a unanimous vote from all the colonies, and
they think it looks good.
Yeah,
they think it looks best to have unanimous. They can go 9 out of 13. By the way, it's an interesting number, and they use the same fraction for the Constitution ratification. But everybody's gut, and this is just real life. Everybody's gut is it looks best if it's 13 out of 13. And we've made such a fundamental statement. This gets lost. When they started using one word, all kinds of things became potential. Some of the potential is good and some of it can be really rough. But the word that was used starting in the fall of 1774, by the way, Lincoln finds this out. The word that was used is continental. When they decided this has to be continental, a lot of things began to change. And from a leadership standpoint, I tell my clients, when you're writing a big plan, or maybe you're putting together a business plan for a new venture you're doing, or whatever it is, and the words matter, right? The things you are choosing may have a life you're not entirely aware of for you down the road. And their word was Continental. So that means then everybody's got a hook to hang on and come back to and say 9 out of 13 doesn't work if it's Continental. We've got to be 13 out of 13. If you don't use the word Continental, you don't even need to have this discussion.
Yeah.
But because they had embraced it, almost 2 years earlier, now we've got to have unanimity. And that's going to mean all kinds of horse trading to get that true. So we could go on and on about some of this, but again, I just encourage folks to realize, when words matter, they're going to have a meaning that you're not fully aware of down the road.
Yeah, this is the first I've heard of it. So you tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like that's a beginning of e pluribus unum. That
of course
the idea, hey, we've got to keep the Union together. Chris, that idea sets the stage for the next century.
We're living it now.
Yeah,
we live it now. And so I have 3 themes that I've uncovered in Redux, and I split them by years. So the first one, 1774 to 1776, Union first, nation second. And I'm going to contradict myself.
Okay.
It won't be the first time right, today. That is the truth. You look at the documents, you pause and try to enter the minds and hearts and souls of the people of the period. It's Union first and nation second. I'm a Lincoln on this.
Explain this. Just give me a little more detail. Union meaning collection of states versus
collection of
Americans.
Collection of communities. And the communities were called colonies, but the colonies had subparts to them as well.
Sure.
Particular towns and so on.
New Hampshire had like 3 towns. It still does.
It's exactly true. And some of the towns outsize one another.
Yeah.
So if you're a port called Philadelphia, you have a different relationship to the rest of your colony. But it's the union of those communities that was formed first. When they came together in the first capital G general, capital M meeting, and that was what everybody agreed to, was the general meeting in early September of 1774. They knew they were sitting down and beginning to talk about and think about and feel about a union together. They had tried it a couple of times before. It didn't work. The clearest way that they had tried it was in 1765-66 with the Stamp Act resistance. It had a little bit of success, but nothing enduring.
Yeah.
And once the Parliament repealed the act, its existence went away. The reason for its existence, raison d'etre, the reason for its existence disappeared. Kind of like the Cold War a little bit.
Yeah.
So, but boy, you get to September of 74, and the dynamics have changed. And I don't mean to confuse everybody, least of which me, but when Abraham Lincoln was first challenged with the idea of who am I politically, and this is in 1854-55, he decided, and of course he's a Whig at that point, but the Whigs are dying off by the month in terms of affiliation. He decided he was going to take time, Lincoln being Lincoln, I'm going to take time, and I'm going to dive into the documents, the big documents.
Right.
And he does. There's this great real story, true story of Cassius Clay, the fire-breathing abolitionist, coming to Springfield to give a speech on the courthouse lawn. And there's a big group of people there. Lincoln and his buddies are there. And Lincoln, 6'4", literally stretched out on the grass, whittling. And as Cassius Clay is just breathing fire from the pulpit, and everybody's getting all wound up, in favor of him and all of that, somebody thinks to look at hey Abraham, sprawled out on the ground. What do you think? And he doesn't answer. All he does is just keep whittling. And so he dives into the documents to decide what it is he's whittling. And he says, I found it. I found the thing at the core of the American experience. That's not his word. That's what it is.
Sure.
And it's consent.
Hmm.
And where does he find it? And this is the reason I bring it up to you. He said, I found it in September of 1774. I did not find it in the Declaration. I found it in the first general meeting and its work product. That's the American Union.
Hmm.
He said, and then everything flows from that fall. By the way, just so you know, it's totally economic. It's an economic boycott. No more imports, no more exports, et cetera, until they repeal 4 pieces of legislation that everybody was upset about. They were called the Intolerable Acts.
Right.
Post-Tea Party, you know all that.
This is 1774 you're talking
Yes.
about. Right.
And and they called themselves the Continental Association. So this economic boycott was supposed to be all 13 colonies, imports, exports. That was the Continental Association. And Lincoln said, that is conception. And this is my word. That's conception. Sperm meets egg. And you see the Union conceived right there.
Ken Burns really leans into that too, saying, women are a huge part of that moment.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they're the ones making purchases. And because women across the continent made the decision to go American made and to do without 1776 pens, John. Right?
You're right. Right.
Like it's a hugely important moment. And I think this is, it's old white men founding, rich white men founding a government for themselves, but it's women making purchasing decisions. It's free black men in Massachusetts forming a regiment early in the war. And this is the most integrated army that America will see until World War II.
Right.
Fighting for this idea of a nation, right? Or as you say, a union.
That's exactly true. And so to take us back up into the Declaration, and 250 years ago right now, what they're reading community by community or having read to them is a birth certificate. And the birth certificate describes the baby called the nation. But the gestation starts in September of 1774 and gets affected by things like Thomas Paine and common sense. That has an impact on the womb that will produce the baby that has the certificate written in July of 76. So I'm a big one in this. We talk about union first, nation second. Well, that's gestation. And some creatures take more time to gestate than others. Elephants and hippos and all the rest. So we have to understand what's occurring in the gestation that affects the DNA and what will be born and then start to grow after the Declaration arrives. So I think we really need to recover the gestational period and learn about that DNA of ourselves.
So you mentioned 3 things that you've learned doing this series.
Yep. So there's
2 and 3, and then we'll move on to Washington.
Sure. So first, union first, nation second, 1774 to 1776. Second one, 1776. Notice I'm using that year again. 1776 to 1783 is war first, independence second.
Mm-hmm.
I can declare myself anything. I can declare I'm young. But unless I go out and in my conduct prove that I'm young acting, I'll look ridiculous.
Yeah.
So they can declare independence all day long. Doesn't matter. What makes it true will be the war. And so what I would argue and what I tell people is we study Locke and Jefferson and all of these important things, and they are important, and the sources and the other kinds of things. What if you thought of the war as a book and the war as the author of its own book? And that author and that book had every bit as deep of an impact as any other philosopher or written word ever did.
Much like look at the fallout in society from Iraq. Or look at the fallout in society from Vietnam and
World
the way
War
soldiers were.
Civil War, for Pete's sake.
World War II, you want to talk about the the period from 45 to 2000 is like these men like my grandfather who are in these institutions that save the world, and so let's trust institutions and build institutions. And then the Vietnam generation comes in and goes, let's tear down the institutions, right? So I think
That's exactly right.
I think if you look at, I think that's a really understated point of look at what war can do in a society that is, I mean, for South Carolina, Massachusetts, this is total war in certain places.
It is. And I just scream this from the rooftops of how important this is, and to overhaul and overturn our thinking of what it is.
Yeah.
That's why I say act as if it's a book, and act as if it's an author. And I think that starts to kind of change how you approach war's reality for these 8 years. The other thing I'll say to you along these lines, just as an illustration, let's take our big three Federalist Paper authors, Hamilton, Jay, and Madison. When they write that work, and it's only one of many that has an impact, obviously it has a big impact, they're writing from their experiences when? During the war. It's the war that defines their experiences. It's not governmental debate. It's not, well, Plato meant this and Aristotle said that. They're trying to deal with how do we fight and win or not lose a war. And that's a lot different than how do we balance the budget? How do we pave the roads and all of those kinds of governmental functions. And so you really have to credit it for what it is, which is, I would argue, the most important influence on the national formation. There is no second. There's maybe a fifth, and the other three are blank. So war first, independence second. Now, one thread before I get to the third, and then I'll shut up. One thread that's running through these things is, we like to focus on the institutions, the Congress and the legislature and the branches and all those kinds of things. It's important. We like to focus on the processes of the institutions. But what I think Americanism Redux reveals is that there's an additional component that has to be accounted for, and that's relationships. The relationships between the people doing all of this is critical, or are critical. They are paramount in what they mean for how an institution will function, and how a process will work, and how a structure or a scaffolding will hold together. I mean, we can talk about legislature and executive and judicial and all the rest, but the reality is that the people who are tinkering, building, designing, redesigning, retinkering, all the rest, they're doing that in relationship with one another, but also in relationship to many other things, which is maybe specific places, specific moments, and so on. So relationships become an essential way of understanding how things happened and how they've come to us. I'm sorry to go on about it, but I
like the popularity of Founding Brothers 20 years ago. It's like it took these guys from the previous generation's conception was marble figures who did no wrong, and Founding Brothers made it like these guys fought and had petty arguments, and Hamilton gets killed by Burr. Like, let's humanize this a little bit. And I think that's been the great gift to Americans over the last 25 years is a writing of history that's been a lot more human about the founders than trying to create a national myth.
Right. One quick thing about Washington that I bumped into in my Redux. This is from, I don't know, late 75, early 76, where he's had some success. I think it's before the siege of Boston is actually won. He's had some success, and somebody writes to him about it, and Washington replies back, "Thank you for your congratulations. Thank you, appreciate it." And then he says, I've really fallen down on something, and I want to address this because it's critical that I get onto this. And here's what it is: dinners. I really need to start having dinners with people and specific people. And that's got to be a regular thing I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I want you, I think it's Joseph Reed, perhaps. I want you to let's start putting together a schedule of dinners that I can have that are going to build these relationships. I thought that was just a really remarkable communication that he did. So that's the second, right? War first, independence second. And then my third and final one, 1783. And again, note, I've borrowed a year, so I'm overlapping a year. That's very purposeful. The theme is some peace first, more perfect second. So I went back and thought, what is one reality everybody shares heading into this third and final period? And remember, they don't know what's happening tonight or next week.
Right.
The reality everybody shares, perfectly and imperfectly, is peace, the absence of war. Now, those are two different things, I realize. But there is some element of peace that appears by late 1783. And I don't care where you are. Now, you can be on a plantation as an enslaved person. You can be whatever. I mean, but still, you're in an environment where there's some peace, and broadly speaking, that's true for everyone. Now, you may get punished tomorrow for something that you've done today, or you may have various things happen next week that don't constitute a lack of violence. But the fact is, on a national basis, it is some peace. Everybody starts there.
Right.
But it changes quickly. And it takes you to then a desire to secure a more perfect union.
Yeah.
And now we're right back to where we started. Not a more perfect nation, a more perfect union. So I think that's my theme for the third piece.
Yeah, I think when you look back in history, presentism is always brought up. Like, we judge history by our standards and what we think values are or ought not to be. But I mean, so much of it's just compromises to get to just inch forward, right? Like, you look at our own time, it's this housing situation. Everybody thinks housing needs to be more affordable. Congress finally passed a law on something. And then the president's like, nope, right? So there's never unanimous agreement. We are going to talk about, in part 2, George Washington. Okay, we started nerding out on the Declaration. We talked too long. And Dan has to go to an event. So we're going to do a part 2. He's going to come back and we're going to have a conversation. And what I would love to talk about in those 4 dates, you have, with George Washington, we have 4 periods in his life where he transitions. Right, Washington is a surveyor turned soldier turned planter turned soldier again turned planter turned president turned planter. Right, and there's so many facets to this man, and so many different pieces of American history contained within George Washington, and contradictions and wrestling with issues like slavery. Right, he's also a great leader. Right, that first letter that you're going to bring to our attention in the next episode. He is leaving his command in 1758, and his men are like, please don't go. We don't want you to leave. You whipped us, and you were beating us, and you were disciplining us, but we don't want you to leave, right? So what I want to talk about in the next episode is continue the conversation. What are lessons? Glenn Beck wrote a book called Being George Washington. I don't know that he's fully lived that out, but his thesis is basically like George Washington is a model for each of us in our own time. We're all complicated. And so I'd love to have a discussion about leadership and George Washington, and how can we each take lessons from this man?
Yeah, bet. That sounds great.
And implement that in our own civic life, because you should have one. And how can we take the ideals that we just talked about in this episode and turn George Washington's life and these goodbyes into a playbook? How does that sound?
That sounds great. Can I give you 2 things to kind of tuck into your cap here as we head?
All right. Tease it, please.
Here we go. Number 1, remember, there's no reason to remember because I didn't say it, but I have a definition of leadership that probably I need to share.
Okay.
Which is extraordinarily simple. You're a leader if you have 1 or more followers. That's it. And I mean real ones, not social media stuff.
Hey, I've got 3 kids.
There you are.
I'm a husband, dad,
a neighbor,
right?
And so on. Yeah. So you're a leader with 1 or more followers. That's thing 1 I want you to kind of roll around with for a bit. And then the second one is you're 100% correct. You and I have talked online and offline about the 4 years. 1758, 1775, 1783, and 1796. What I want everybody to kind of be ready for is a discussion about, is there a fifth year? I have it in mind, and I'll be interested in your reaction when I come back.
Okay. All right. Well, Dan, tell us about your Remnant Trust event real quick.
Sure.
And plug that so people can come and hear you do this in person. And what is Remnant Trust, and then what's the event?
Remnant Trust is a nonprofit organization that collects and protects and distributes access to the classic first edition and rare edition books of everything you can possibly imagine about Western philosophy and politics and so on.
The Historical Society has Freedom's Framework right now, and you can see an original printed declaration from that time period, a constitution, all these different amazing documents from their
amazing
time.
Is the word.
Yeah. I mean, first print Gutenberg Bibles, right? Like stuff like that.
Exactly right. And for 99% of it, they encourage you to touch hold, use, and all that. So that's really cool. So you come to the events that they have, and you can do that with the books that they bring for that particular event. So I've been this is my second presentation to them, or not presentation, my second experience with people. The first one was on Thomas Paine some months ago that went just better than I had any right to ever expect. It was just great. Had a wonderful time. The one coming up is on 250 years ago, early August, 1776. And so I'm going to put everybody in the day, in the moment, in the week, kind of like we've talked about here, right?
Yeah.
Of what's going on. You know, we've got the big document that supposedly changes the world. That's a month old at this point. And what else is true? And what else is more true 250 years ago, that moment. So we're all going to dive headfirst into that experience. And I think just like now, where, we don't know what the news is going to flash up in another hour.
And that'll be different tomorrow. So, and then
notice I didn't even say tomorrow.
I know. I get to do this show like once a month, and every month I'm like, oh yeah. So since the last month we started a war, and then the month before that I'm like, so since then we had a coup.
So this is real life for us. So we're gonna see what it meant for them to have that same kind of reality. And I think maybe gain some insights, shed some light on what that reality is for us 250 years later.
Gosh, because the last time you were here, and please go listen to this episode, look for Dan's name, just search in Apple or YouTube or whatever. What stuck with me was the concept of like the 1800 election between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and the debate on whether we're going to keep this republic going or not,
right?
Or are we going to junk this? And we're still having that debate.
Same one.
But we are 250 years entrenched into democracy, a democratic republic, excuse me. And they weren't. It wasn't guaranteed. It was a huge shift for their society, John Adams, Mr. Freedom, just signed the Alien Sedition Acts.
Right.
So, yeah, fascinating stuff. Follow Dan, again, historicalsolutions.com.
That's correct.
Go sign up for his email newsletter, follow his content, and come out to Remnant Trust. I'll be there. So if you can come, if you want to meet me, you can meet me. You can meet Dan and all the other locals who really love this stuff. So thank you so much. If you're listening to this program, point of personal privilege, I'm helping start a group for the Dispatch. Do you know the Dispatch?
I'm a subscriber.
Okay. Well, tomorrow night, so this is going to air today because I don't do a lot of editing. Tomorrow night, Tuesday evening, if you were listening to this, we're going to have a get-together for readers, and I'll put in the show notes a link with the details and to sign up because I didn't know I was going to do this, otherwise I would have prepped, but it's called the Dispatch Juntos. And so if you're listening to this show, you're probably a listener to the Dispatch, and across the country, they're forming these juntas, which was Ben Franklin, when he was a young man, gets his friends together to talk about the issues of the day. And so they're taking that idea and extending it to their readership. There's one near you, I promise you. And I'll put the link for that. But if you're here locally and you want to get together with other like-minded people who are center-right but politically homeless, I think you'd enjoy coming out and talking to folks. So if you missed this one, if you're listening to this 6 months later, it's still going to be going on. You can click that link, sign up, and you can find out more. So thanks. for listening to this show. Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. Over 50 of you continue to support this show. It's why I continue to do it. And to the thousands of you that still listen, I can't believe it. And thank you so much for continuing to be part of this community. And thank you, Dan, for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
And we're excited to have a conversation with you here in a week or two. And thank you for listening to the Chris Spangle Show.